Hey everybody, my name is Brian Demhauser. Some of you know me as Hawk Blogger on Twitter and Instagram, on YouTube, and I get a lot of questions about how to get started as a blogger, as a podcaster, how I got to the point where I have credentials and I'm able to go and speak to the players and the coaches and be in the locker room. And I don't have as much time to be able to speak to every person who comes and asks. And so I thought I might just record this, post it up there for anybody who is curious about how I got started, any tips I have, and my suggestions, both from a writing and blogging perspective, as well as from a podcasting, YouTube, and other perspective. So hopefully this is helpful. The first thing I would say, I think the most common question I get is, how did you get into this? And so I'll tell my story really briefly and share that I went to school with the intent of being a sports writer. I wanted to be a sports journalist. I loved sports. I was obsessed with sports. And I thought I was going to go to Syracuse University, which is a great sports journalism school. Ended up going to American University in Washington, D.C., got a degree, like started to study print journalism as a major. And I loved writing and I loved that part, but I kind of found out that and discovered how little print journalists got paid. And I understood what was going on with the industry. I'm old, so this was back in the 90s. And decided that that wasn't the career that I wanted. To get paid that little and have to work that many hours, that many days, just felt like the trade-off that I wasn't going to be happy with long term. So I decided to add a sports psychology major. I was going to be a sports psychologist. And then I was like, well, I don't really want to go to graduate school. And so I ended up graduating with 2 degrees, one in print journalism and one in psychology, neither of which I ended up using. I stumbled into a job in technology working at a company called Adobe. You might have heard of. They make like Photoshop and Illustrator and things like that. And I worked there in tech support, answering phone calls, and I worked my way up through that and spent 26 years in tech and loved it, thrived in it, flourished, had a great career, really loved it. But one of the things I found in tech was that, at least early on, I'd find a lot of intellectuals, a lot of people that could have conversations about an article in the New York Times, but I didn't find a lot of people that were really into sports the way I was. I mean, I was obsessed with sports. It's what my friends and I spent every waking hour either playing or doing, talking about. And so I was kind of had this itch to scratch there. And a friend suggested that I start a blog. So this was back in 2007. I did start a blog. And when I started my blog, I mean, I didn't know what I was doing. I just started writing. I had a lot of things I wanted to say, so I started writing them. But then once you write it and you click publish, you're like, well, but who's going to find this? And so I started doing some like kind of shady stuff, to be honest. I didn't really know it was shady, but I didn't know what else I was supposed to do. I'd go on to places where I knew Seahawks fans were, other websites, seattletimes.com or Tacoma News Tribune or wherever people were congregating. And I would post links to my article in comments. And that was not okay. They didn't really love that. But it did, like, that helped a little bit. But really, for 2 years, basically, I had maybe 2 loyal readers. And what I was looking for there was kind of a community. I wanted people to talk about the Seahawks with. And so it kind of scratched the itch somewhat to have some people to kind of obsess about the team with. But I didn't start it with this goal of becoming anything special. I just wanted to have a place to kind of get my thoughts out. But what started happening is, this is my first tip to you, if writing is the part that you're interested in, is I wrote every day, like pretty much every day. And I got to be such a better writer by doing that. And what started, like, I can look back at my earliest blog posts and they're kind of like, ugh, it's a cringe kind of thing to look at what I wrote back then. But I got better. And that coincided with kind of the rise of Twitter, which, I was a reluctant kind of starter in, but then I played with it and I found this community of interest that was passionate about the Seahawks, and I could post things. And I was also then interacting with players and media members. And when I tweet out a link to my article in response to a conversation that was naturally occurring on Twitter, it felt organic and it didn't feel forced, and people would retweet it. And so I'd have, local sports radio folks and local media folks, sharing out my articles, and that helped me grow because I was, I think, doing good work and I was making some novel points, and I was not just trying to create content for content's sake. I was creating content because I was obsessed about the topic, and I felt like I had something to add to the conversation that other people weren't. I would often find things where I had a really different perspective than what was kind of the dominant perspective among fans or among media, and I'd make my case about why I felt differently. And so that fueled my fire a little bit to write those pieces. And then also it was validating to see people come and read those. I also benefited from the fact that that happened to be around the time that Pete Carroll was taking over the Seahawks, and they had a rapid rise to being the best team in the NFL, which brought a lot of attention to anyone that was creating Seahawks content that knew what was going on there. I started getting inbound requests for, sponsorships and things like that I had never any intent to do. I was making good money as a tech employee. I didn't really need to make a few dollars on the side with this. But then I realized I didn't have to keep that money. I could actually donate it. So I started to accept those deals. I worked with some sponsors, some big national brands, a bunch of different folks, and decided that, I could donate all that money. And so I donated all that money to charity, which has been really cool. And that's been another thing that I've done and made me feel less icky to be taking money for the work that I was doing. But by taking some of the money, it also helped me understand the industry a little bit and how advertisers and how agencies work with these content creators. This was really before the quote influencer term really took over. So I was getting a kind of a front row seat for how that was developing. And it helped me understand what they cared about, helped me learn about, the advertising business and how much impressions matter, how much your demographics matter, how much the, scope or reach of your audience matters, which happened to also align with what I was doing in my job, building software products for people that were creating content. So it was really beneficial. It was really great. And the blog blew up. It was featured on, ESPN. It was Bill Simmons' podcast mentioned it multiple times. Wrote articles that appeared in Seattle Times. Bleacher Report a bunch. So like I got offers to acquire the blog. All this kind of stuff kind of happened during that time period, and it got to the point where, I don't know, it was probably like 500,000, 600,000 page views a month, which was pretty big for an independent blog. And one of the things you're going to find is my story is pretty different than most, because most people you're going to find that get a foothold in this industry, they do so by piggybacking on a platform or a outlet that already has built-in reach, that has built-in marketing. So if you become a new reporter and you work for the Seattle Times, or maybe you're a fan and you want to do this on the side, you can work for a SB Nation fan site, or even Sports Illustrated has essentially become like a quasi fan site. It's not as much a professional platform for journalism as it once was. And like there's Locked On is another one I think is out there that also is kind of more of a fan site from my perspective. But they all have this platform. So you can write for them or be part of those systems and get reach automatically. All you have to do is write. They take care of distributing it. For me, I had none of that. I started it all from scratch. I built it up from scratch. I built the brand myself. I have the website that I maintain. I do all the writing, all the editing, all the graphics. Like I do all of that for the blog. I did get some folks to come on board with me and that were interested, and I let them do some writing on the blog as well. But for the most part, this has been something that I've just built on my own. And that is the hardest possible path. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend it if you're looking to get your career started the fastest and get eyeballs on your work the fastest. Then your best bet's probably looking at a existing fan site. SB Nation is a good one. You can write, there's places on those sites usually where you can post reader stories and people can comment on that. You can be a commenter and write comments there. Reddit is another place where you can write posts and you can either get upvotes or downvotes. You can get some feedback on whether people are liking what you have to say. You don't have to write to get liked, but writing to get engagement, that's something that's interesting, that is what matters. And just writing in general is what matters. So I think going someplace that already has some reach is a good way to get started. And then finding your voice, finding like, how do you talk about things? What's your unique thing that you bring to the table? That's another thing that I think is pretty important. And that only comes from real consistency in how much you're writing. So that's a big part of it. There are real benefits of doing your own thing. It is the much, much harder path, like way, way harder path than going on an existing platform. But one of the benefits of doing your own thing is you get to decide what you're going to write, when you're going to write it, how often you're going to write it. You get to pick all your topics, all that kind of stuff. And for me, that's just, I don't want someone telling me what to write about. This was always meant to be a fun thing that I was just a passion project for me. And so I didn't want an editor telling me, here's what you got to go write about, figure out a story. And I didn't want an editor telling me, no, I don't like your opening, or I don't like this, or you got to trim this. I wanted to write what I wanted to write, and I wanted to publish it, and I wanted to be done with it. And so that was me. And I also, personally, I take pride in the fact that it's my own thing and that I took this, less traveled path and built something that has grown and become a brand that some people know. And that's cool. So there are a lot of benefits. Obviously, you also get, if you choose to make money off of it, you get to keep all the money as opposed to just doing work for free to build someone else's brand, to build somebody else's business. I've reaped the rewards over time, and I'll talk about this in a second, because I did this on my own, because this is all mine, and I haven't just given it all away to someone else. So there are benefits, but it's way, way harder. So generally, I would say start by writing on a platform, on a place, on Reddit, on something where there's already people, already eyeballs, and you can kind of learn your voice and learn how you want to cover whatever you want to write about. Now, that's writing. And the only other thing I'll say on the writing, I talked about writing every day or writing consistently. I think having some articles that are based on, a schedule. Like for me, I've written my morning after column for, 16 years, 17 years, whatever it's been. After every game, I write my thoughts, the next morning, and I share my perspective. It's my column. I've started in the last probably 10 years writing a preview article, which I call Tale of the Tape. And so I know every Tuesday, every Wednesday, I'm going to be writing that article. Having some schedule, recurring schedule, can help you kind of get into that writing mode. I also think if you can interact with other writers, I got some good tips from people that had been writers for, long periods of time professionally. That helped. Being someone who majored in print journalism, that did help as well. I learned, the style guides. I learned the inverted pyramid and how to start a story. I learned, how to include quotes from people, from players, whatever, in my stories stylistically. So that all gives me a foundation with which to build on. If you don't know those things, I would take a short course on that. It can be an online course. You can watch YouTube videos, but knowing the kind of journalistic style guides, I think, is important. I think there's benefit to doing that. But you can also just go your own way, write however you want to write. But I think there's a lot of benefit from figuring out how to write concisely and write with, know how long your openings should be, know what you're trying to do with them. All that stuff can help. So again, that's the writing piece. On the podcast side. The podcast for me started a little bit later. Initially, it was an audio only podcast. And it was just a place to have like an actual back and forth, a conversation with people. And, you can only do that so much, whether it's on text or on Twitter or wherever else or on Reddit. It's fun to kind of have a live discussion about a topic. And so that was the reason I started. Again, similar to writing, it wasn't because I wanted to have some big notoriety or blow up. It was because I personally had a desire to have these conversations. And I think that's important personally. I think being authentic in whatever you do matters. And people are going to know if you're just trying to play a part, if you're just trying to be a YouTuber or be an influencer. Personally, I think that doesn't come across very well. And I think a lot of people are turned off by that. So pick something that you really care about and that you do if nobody else was watching. I would write about the Seahawks if nobody was listening because I'm just passionate about it. Anyway, so getting back to the podcast, I started talking to people that I'd met on Twitter, and it was great to have conversations about the Seahawks. I happen to work at Adobe, as I mentioned, which has products like Adobe Audition that is an audio editing product. And I knew how to take the audio that I was recording and rip it down and then do some editing in Audition. I'm not like professional at it. I'm not some, professional audio editor or audio engineer as they're called, but I'm comfortable with technology. So I had no problems figuring out how to do that. I also watched some YouTube videos where I needed to. Then I picked a place to host it and got that going. For the most part, I think that was a pretty small audience for a while, and it was pretty infrequent when we would do it. I would just kind of pick random times. Then in like 2017, Jeff Simmons, a friend of mine who was just an acquaintance from Twitter at that time, used to be a professional reporter up in Toronto, said, let's do a podcast together. And we started Real Hawk Talk back then, just the two of us. There are some very silly early versions. You want to go find the first episode of Real Hawk Talk. It is not great. The technology we were using wasn't great. The episode wasn't great, but you can see how humble the starts are. And that would be my first piece of advice on all of this, which is don't try to wait till everything's perfect. Just get going. Like, don't be so prideful that you can't have crap put out there. Like, just do it, get it out there, and then improve it over time. It is way better than trying to perfect it before you start, because there's just too many other things that'll keep you from starting in the first place. So when we started Real Hawk Talk, it was a weekly show. So again, having a schedule was useful. I kind of recognized that Jeff and I are we're not the most dynamic personalities. And so we're pretty serious and we kind of get geeky about getting into discussing the sport. I thought we needed a little bit more personality on the show. And so it just so happened that Evan Hill and Nathan Ernst had recently joined my crew. And I thought they would be worth bringing on the show. And sure enough, like the four of us have been doing it since pretty much episode 5 or something like that. We've done over 330 episodes at this point. We've had amazing guests from, Mina Kimes, Katie Nolan, Mike Garofalo, Bobby Wagner, Richard Sherman, Golden Tate, on and on and on. We've had amazing guests. We had Jeffrey Dean Morgan. And all of that happened because we created a environment that was fun and engaging and was friendly. Like, we like each other as people. We like each other as friends. We're texting on the side. We have our own group chat. We're talking stuff all the time. And I think that shows up in the episodes. And again, authenticity is really key. So if you can't find something that you can just be yourself at, then I think your odds are a little bit less of success. If you can, then also be honest with yourself. Like, how dynamic are you? How engaging are you? Do people respond to you? And I think this is not unique to whether it's just in a podcast or a YouTube show. It's in real life. Like, whether are you the life of the party? Are you the person that stands in the corner? Would you never go to a party? Who are the types of people that you get along with? What do you talk about? If you're somebody who can carry on a conversation, like all those things are indicators of how it's going to go for you if you're going to do a show on air and you're going to have these, these conversations. Because if you're awkward, generally speaking, that's going to show through in your show. And it makes people maybe feel a little bit awkward and maybe less likely to want to watch. That doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. It just means you need to kind of know yourself. Maybe you need a co-host. Maybe you need to find a couple other people that bring something else. See if your dynamic as a group changes that. So there's lots of different ways for this to go. But again, the key thing is just to go. Start, try, put it out there, and figure out, who likes it. Once you get people, anyone that starts watching or listening to whatever you're doing on a regular basis, engage with them. Find out what they like. Find out what they don't. Find out why they came there. Where did they find out about your show or your blog or whatever it is that you're doing? Engage with the people that are engaging with your content, and you'll learn a lot. You'll learn a lot about what's going on. I also happen to look at analytics. So with blogging, I have, Google Analytics, and I could see when there was, how many people were coming and what stories were getting read the most and at what time of the day. I could see how when I posted something on Twitter, which was my dominant social platform, how that would affect, that was an effective marketing channel versus, if I posted something on Facebook or wherever else, how that responded. And so I started to learn where my audience was, when they were really ready to read or watch. I learned how often people were coming back. I learned when people were not coming back. I learned how the impact of the team, things outside my control, affected my audience and affected engagement patterns. I paid attention to all that stuff because I was interested in it, and it helped me adjust along the way. So all those things have been useful. I've also tried, whenever people have invited me on shows, I try to do my best to attend those, and it's getting harder and harder, but I try to do that and kind of pay forward what was done for me at times where people would come on my show that I didn't know why they'd be agreeing to come on my show. It's a tiny show, but they would. And I want to try to do that for other folks as well. Not that I'm some big time thing, but I know when you're just getting started, it's hard. So I try my best, but hard to do that. In any event, so I think doing things consistently, you're going to hear from me, is the most important. Then the next most important is doing them well, having quality things, have things that people want to hear or read. If you don't have something interesting to say or to read, it doesn't matter how consistently you're putting it out there. People are not going to want to pay attention to it. So this is why, again, coming back to finding your voice, there's times I'd love to be like Evan Hill and be this like wild hot take machine who can just be hilarious and say things that I would never be comfortable saying. But that's not who I am, And when I've tried, like, not because I'm trying to emulate somebody else, but when I just try to let that part of me out and then I hear it back, I'm like, ugh, like it's not a good look. And so sometimes you just got to know who you are and know what you bring to the table. And for me, I'm kind of I'm obsessed, which helps, but I tend to be insightful about people. I tend to be insightful about patterns and numbers. And I tend to see where there are kind of gaps in coverage of the team and misunderstandings about the team that I think I can correct. I also come from as I said, a long professional background in tech, and as a leader, I was, a senior leader in these companies. So I've learned a lot about leadership. I've learned a lot about people. I've learned a lot about career development, a lot of other things that surprisingly applies to professional sports. And so when I see how people are interacting, I see how leaders are handling things, I have some other things I can bring to the table. So what's your unique perspective? What's your unique talent that you can bring and show? That's another thing that I would recommend you kind of search for and find. and have other people help you find it by seeing how much they respond to what you have to say. I guess from there, I would just recommend, I think YouTube's great. YouTube's a place where you can get, if you can get following there, you can get some money from it. I don't think it's like huge money. It's not life-changing money. I'm certainly not making anything close to what I made when I worked in tech, but it's something. And when I was blogging for a long time, it was for free, and I only was making money from sponsors, which were great, but you can't always count on them. So now there is Substack, which I think is a good thing to look at if you're interested in being paid for your writing. But again, I think you have to have a little bit of an audience before you start asking for money for people to read your stuff. So keep that in mind as you work through that. And then what's the last thing I guess I would offer here? So, people want to know how I got credentials. So, credential wise, I literally just ended up reaching out to the PR folks on the team and made my case. And part of the way I was able to make my case is that I have built this brand and I have built a larger reach, social reach, overall reach than a lot of the professional media that cover the team. And so that's one piece that I had to have already demonstrated that value. Two, I have a super long track record. I've been doing this for now 18 years. So there's sturdiness. I've actually covered the team longer than anybody that's on the beat right now professionally. So that was another piece. And then three, I started this daily show, Hawk Blogger Mornings, that I do every single day, 7 days a week. At the time of this recording, I think it has been 214 straight days. And that was something that no one else was doing. People would say they have a daily show, but it was 5 days a week and the weekends were empty. Well, as of now, I'm doing a 7-day-a-week show and it's been getting a ton of traction, hundreds of thousands of people watching it. And that is something that was enough. And so the team was willing to give me a chance. I think I would always encourage the art of the small ask, as a good friend once taught me. Don't ask for everything. Maybe ask for, can I attend this one event with credentials? Like, can I attend this 1 week or weekend? I think it's very unlikely, for what it's worth, to get in there because NFL is the toughest to get credentials for. And so I think you really have to have built up your reputation before you get those credentials. If credentials are something that you really want, best way to get them is to work in a professional setting, work at sports radio, work for a newspaper, work for one of these platforms that is not a fan platform, but a literal news media platform, and you can get credentials. Then you have a reputation or you have a relationship. You might be able to parlay into independent credentials if you ever to go independent. But that's the most straightforward way to get credentials. Getting it the way I did it, I think is super unlikely and very low probability of happening for most people. It would probably take a very long time and you have to have the right PR people to feel that way about you. So not a high probability way to go, but it's great for me because, I get the access. I get a chance no one's telling me what questions to ask. No one's telling me who to interview. No one's telling me when to do what. That's what I want to do. And I'm very fortunate. I'm very grateful that I found this later in my life and basically started a second career. So, again, not a path that I think a lot of people are going to find success in. For me, the fact that I had another job and I was able to do this for so many years as a side hustle, I think helps. And I think helped make this something that I love and that I think other people have grown to love. So I hope this was helpful to you. I hope whatever you're trying to do, go do it. Have fun with it. Don't care if you get to be the biggest influencer. Don't care about all that stuff. Care about the thing that you are wanting to write about or wanting to talk about, and just let yourself be obsessed with it. Let yourself just immerse in it. It has to be something that you would do if nobody else was paying attention, if nobody else was looking. You just love it. And if you don't feel that way, then you probably need more structure. You probably need it to be a job that somebody is paying you to do and that you're learning to do. And that's okay. But if you want to do this kind of thing, like the influencer route, then you got to love it. You got to love it. It's not for the money, because there's not a lot of money in it in most cases. And you got to do it because it's a passion. So that's the thing I would leave you with. I wish you luck. I will share this video with everyone that requests a conversation with me going forward. Hopefully it helps. And if you have more questions, you can kind of leave them in comments. I'll do my best over time to respond to those comments with my own answers. I'm Brian Nemhauser. You found me here. Hopefully you have found my content as well, either at hawkblogger.com or on YouTube at Real Hawk Talk, or on Instagram at Hawkblogger. So I think I'm also at Facebook at Hawkblogger. So all those places are great. Good luck to you, and take care.